taste of both risk management and crypto. I hope everyone can see my screen. I am sharing it now. If you can't see it, then type in the chat section and let me know. All right, guys, before we get started, I'm going to give you a little bit about my background, and then we'll just dive right in. We're going to do a little bit of a lecture on, I think we start out with risk management, then we dive right into crypto. We'll take a little bit of a break, and then we'll play a round of Jeopardy that has been tailored to the information that we're going to talk about tonight. So take notes. You know, one of the things I do in my boot camps is everything that we lecture on, I'm going to test your knowledge with some kind of gaming format. So I have a Jeopardy round that's going to be based on what we're going to talk about now that we'll play after a break. I also have a tool site that's called Kahoot. It's another gaming competitive way to test your knowledge. I haven't tried it yet on a session like this, but I believe that it should work, so we're going to try it out and see how it goes. All right, again, my name is Donald Parker. I always like to tell folks, or when I talk to folks about cyber, I like to find out why. You know, how did you fall into this field and why? For me, I was instantly attracted to this field ever since around the year 2000. You know, I remember the first time I saw a commercial about a computer or a news broadcast about a computer virus, and you know, I just had to know what that meant, and how, and you know, how is a computer virus different from a human virus? You know, how is it similar? But you know, I've always been interested in technology. My first computer was a Commodore 64, I think, back when I was 10 or 12 years old. I know I'm dating myself a bit, but so I've been programming and into technology most of my life. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics, minor in computer science. I served 3 years in the U.S. Army as a software developer. They taught us how to program in Ada and COBOL. Again, I only served 3 years in the Army. After the Army, I've been consulting to federal agencies for over 20 years now. You know, from the Pentagon to Department of Homeland Security, DOD, non-DOD, you name it. So I continue to serve my country. I got my CISSP back in 2005, so I'm considered an old head in a sense. And almost 6 months after getting that, you know, passing the exam, I started teaching domains, a domain here and a domain there. I also have the certificate of cloud security knowledge, which is the first cloud-based certificate. I believe it was replaced by the CCSP. Well, actually not replaced, but another one has been created. I have the ITIL and the MCSE as well. And I think I'm done with certs. You know, unless I decide to create one, I don't think I'm going to go after any more certifications. Maybe CEH. I think that's one I like to get some experience in C&D. So after getting certified and starting to teach domains here and there, I discovered that I'm an audio learner. I can't read a book from cover to cover, but I can listen to an audio book in a week, you know. And not everybody is like that, but even if you aren't, I encourage folks to add that element of learning into your arsenal. So I decided to develop a podcast. I've been listening to podcasts for, heck, 10, 15 years now, and so I got on the mic. I started reading my notes into a recorder and posting them on YouTube. I mean, on iTunes, and you know, I've got over 1 million downloads now, every continent on the planet. I get email from folks every day, you know, saying that they were able to pass the exam just from listening to the audio. You know, you can listen to it while you travel to and from work, you know, outside cutting grass, and it's just it's a really good way to hammer the information in your brain that doesn't require you really to do much. So again, I started teaching a domain here or there. I got my first offer to teach a full boot camp in 2007 at Drexel University, and I jumped on it. You know, I didn't feel as though I was ready, but I jumped on it, and since then, my goodness, that was back in 2007. I've taught well over 24 boot camps now. I had a contract with a company in Holland at one time. I was flying out there every other month to teach a boot camp. So when I first started, I was teaching with other people's material. These companies would hire me, these third-party vendors would hire me to teach a class, and they'd give me their slide deck, and I'd go in and teach with their material. So I started writing my own material, and I finished that maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So the course material, the basis of this information we're getting ready to go through, and the basis of the information that I'm going to deliver in the boot camp this coming Monday, I used several different sources. Of course, the common body of knowledge, ISC squared common body of knowledge, is the most authoritative source. You know, that's our Bible. Sean Harris's book, of course, has some really good content in it, and then several other books. So I tried I went through all of those. I tried to identify terms that I thought were important, the smallest grouping of terms that I think are necessary to give you a foundation, enough of a foundation to pass the exam. I categorized all of that information into terms, concepts, formulas, and something I call muscle memory. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So the way I talk, the way I write, I try to use as few words as possible. And that was my objective, to identify the terms that were most important, to organize them in a logical flow, and then to give a definition that used as few words as possible to give you a strong enough baseline to pass the exam. So in my boot camps, you know, I don't just stand up there lecturing all day. You know, of course you can't get away from lecturing, but every boot camp I try to add something new. So you know, gaming, anytime you can gamify learning, you know, it's a win-win. So I have Jeopardy rounds. I have 15 rounds of Jeopardy that it takes to get through all of my course material. And then I have 8 rounds of Kahoot, which is an online thing. We're going to try that a little bit later. We also do lab exercises, and we watch a lot of YouTube videos to help reinforce some of the information and just to break up the monotony of the day. You know, you shouldn't come out of my boot camp feeling too exhausted. Although, you know, studying for this exam it separates folks just because there's so much information. You know, it'll separate the weak from the strong. If you don't have the mental stamina to attack this information, and just do a little bit every day. You know, you don't have to do a lot. Just set aside, wake up a little bit earlier, you know, stay up a little bit later, take your lunch break and listen to the audio or read a book, but, you know, do a page a day. You know, if that's all you can do, just do a little bit of something every day, and I guarantee you'll find out that you'll start out doing a little bit and do a little bit more than you expected you would. Jeopardy is a phenomenal tool. I started out using it just because it was fun, but realized that, you know, the key with passing the exam, when you're reading a question, they give you 4 multiple choice answers. 2 of them you can eliminate really easily, and then you're left with 2 that both could be right. And you have to decide which one is more right based on the scenario presented to you in the question. So identifying keywords, key phrases, key terms is paramount. And that's the focus of my content, and that's what Jeopardy does. It helps you. You're not going to be able to see multiple choice possibilities. You have to visualize the information, and so it helps perfectly with helping you to identify those key terms. All right, with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm on slide number 1, moving on to slide number 2. These are the 8 domains in the ISC² Common Body of Knowledge for the CISSP. Some of you might recall that there used to be 10 domains, and then they cut it down to 8, and no one really knew, why or what that meant. That they just cut out 2 domains and just throw away all that information? Well, no. The answer is no. All of that information from the 10 domains is still there. Some of it, very tiny bit of it, they got rid of, and then they added a whole new domain. But they really just reorganized and regrouped everything. And I have a slide here coming up that's going to show us exactly how they did that. So because of the way I categorize my information, I number the number of terms, the number of concepts from 1 to 2 to 3, all the way up to however many terms there are, however many concepts there are. And because I did that, I was able to take the new CBK for the 8 domain format and identify every term, because I have them numbered, every term, every concept, every principle from the old 10 domain format, and identify exactly where it was moved, what domain it used to be in, and then what domain it was moved into. So if we move on to slide number 3, this shows us exactly what changed and how it changed. So they created a new domain 1, called it Security and Risk Management. They took information from the old domain 2, access control, the old domain 8, law or legal regulations and compliance, and the old domain 7. So they just took pieces and parts from these 3 different domains, created a new title for domain 1, and threw all that stuff up in there. I really don't know why, and I really don't like the flow very much, but I always tell folks, there's a phrase I use in my boot camps, for the purposes of the exam, FTPOTE, for the purposes of the exam, FTPOTE. We have to know it the way they want us to know it, plain and simple. Once we get past the exam, then we can go off and implement things in the best logical way. So if we go down domain 2, domain 3, domain 4 is really the only, or one of the domains that stayed pretty consistent. They just changed the title of the domain from telecommunications and network security to communications and network security. Another one like that is domain 5. They just, the same information, they just changed the title of the domain. And then domain 6 is an entirely new domain. It's the smallest domain, security assessment and testing. And I really think that all of the content in this domain 6 could have been folded up under domain 8, security in the system development lifecycle. But FTPOTE, right? And then domain 7 is the one domain where they kept the same title and all of the information that was in it. And then security in the system development lifecycle replaced software development security. All right, next slide here. So we've talked a little bit about this already. I categorize all of my information into terms, concepts, informational notes, formulas, and muscle memory. So a term could be a word or a group of words designating something. A concept is an overarching theme that may encompass many terms. Informational notes are just helpful pieces of information. Formulas that you see on the exam, there could be some conceptual formulas that don't require mathematical computation, or there could be formulas that actually require you to perform a mathematical computation. So I show the difference between those as we go through the boot camp. And then with muscle memory, you know, that the hardest thing for me in studying for the exam was, first of all, you know, what's important, what's not important, um, um, what's not, you know, what to memorize, what not to memorize. You've got all these different protocols, and in crypto, you've got all these different algorithms at different levels, you know, strengths and bits and all that stuff. So for anything that requires memorization, I created a table, rows and columns of information, and put all that information into a table. So as we're going through this material, I want you to understand the terms, understand the concepts, and the informational notes. But the muscle memory, you know, you can print those tables out, pin them up on your wall, come up with a mnemonic for all the terms in the rows and columns, and try to memorize them. You know, come up with a mnemonic that will allow you to write them down, and then right before you sit for the exam, they give you scratch paper. You can write down all the muscle memory charts that you can, you know, that you can, and that'll help you get through the. It really just helps separate memorization from understanding, in my opinion. All right, guys, next slide. Number 5 is where we get started. So we're going to start, the first term I have is risk. And if you've got a notepad or paper, please write this down. Risk is the most important aspect of everything we do in this field. Everything we do should be as a result of a risk assessment. Every time I interview someone, I ask them, what is risk? And I very rarely get a full and complete answer. It just so happens I was interviewing somebody today at 4 o'clock, and he gave me the perfect answer, the best answer I've ever received. So risk is comprised of 4 components. You have likelihood versus impact of a threat exposing a vulnerability. And those are the 4 components. You can't talk about risk without talking about these 4 components. So to break it down even further, we look at the 2 terms, threat and vulnerability. You don't have a risk unless you have both a threat and a vulnerability. If you have a threat but no vulnerability, you don't have a risk, and vice versa. You have to have both. Just because I have a hole in my fence doesn't mean that there's a risk. If there's no one, if that building and that fence is way out in the desert and no one can get there, there's no threat, then there's no risk. So if you identify that you have both a threat and a vulnerability, then you have a risk. You must assess it. To assess risk, you have to look at both likelihood and impact. What's the likelihood of that threat exposing the vulnerability? You know, how likely is it going to happen? How many times has it happened in the past? And then what would be the impact if that threat overcame that vulnerability? Is it going to cost human life? Is it going to cost a ton of money? Or is it just going to be, you know, a small ding that we can recover from in no time? But again, you don't have a threat. I mean, you don't have a risk if you don't have both a threat and a vulnerability, and you can't measure or assess risk without looking at both likelihood and impact. All right, and an exposure is the actual instance of the threat exploiting the vulnerability. So the key word there is instance, the actual instance that a threat overcomes a vulnerability. And that term threat agent, you know, that when you start trying to find the difference between a threat and a threat agent, you'll get wrapped around the wheel, you'll get into an argument, and I've gotten to a few of them myself. They're really interchangeable. So threat agent is the entity that carries out the exploitation of a vulnerability. You could get away with just listing threats. You could try to categorize those threats by you know, labeling them as different threat agents, but that's up to you. All right, moving on, slide number 6. This is our first informational note. There are 2 ways of performing a risk assessment, quantitative or qualitative. Qualitative deals with numbers, and qualitative deals with subjective reasoning. Usually you'll have a subject matter expert who understands the assets and the environment, and they can determine you know, what the value of assets are, what the likelihood of a threat overcoming a vulnerability, or what would be the impact to the organization. So your assessment can be quantitative, and the results can be expressed either quantitatively using numbers or qualitatively using words to express a range of numbers. Also, your assessment can be qualitative, and the results can be expressed either qualitatively or quantitatively. So don't make the mistake on the exam of assuming that just because you have results expressed as numbers, that the assessment was quantitative. You know, you could do a qualitative assessment and state that a high rating equals 100, medium equals 50, and low equals 10. But just because you express your results as numbers qualitatively doesn't mean that the assessment was quantitative. And there are at least a couple questions on the exam where they'll try to trip you up. The question will talk all about quantitative elements, and then they'll show you numbers as the only possible answer, and you select that, or you select quantitative because you see numbers, and it turns out to be wrong. All right, next slide, number 7. Normally I talk about risk management before talking about a risk assessment. A risk assessment is a component of risk management, but in the interest of time, I've shortened this deck up a little bit. We're just going to dive into risk assessment. If you want the full thing, of course, we start the full boot camp next week. All right, so a quantitative risk assessment. With this one, you are replacing the elements of the risk assessment, and those elements are things like the value of assets you're protecting, whether they be systems or information, the cost and effectiveness of safeguards, and the frequency of attempted and successful exploits. So you're looking at all of that information over time. You have an intrusion detection system that is looking at the number of attempts that happen over a month, over a quarter, over a year, and that's quantitative results, quantitative information. So you're comparing these elements with real numbers, such as time, money, and frequency of occurrence. So these numbers must be collected over time. A purely quantitative risk assessment must be, well, ISC squared says it's just not possible to have a purely quantitative risk assessment. I can't tell you guys what's on the exam, but I do remember seeing a question or two around that. And the reason why you can't have a purely quantitative risk assessment is because you're almost always going to have at least one qualitative element in your risk assessment. And if you have 10 quantitative elements and only one qualitative, then the assessment is not purely quantitative. And for that reason, ISC squared says that it's virtually impossible to have a purely quantitative assessment. And I always tell folks to start out with a qualitative assessment and then try to build in quantitative elements over time and make it more and more quantitative. So if the numbers you gather during your quantitative risk assessment are based on someone's subjective opinion or the estimate, or their estimation, then the assessment is qualitative and not purely quantitative. The assessment may have some quantitative elements, but again, if you introduce even one qualitative element, then a purely quantitative assessment is just not possible. So the first step of a quantitative risk assessment is to identify your assets and evaluate them, assign a value to them. And of course, if you have, your chairs cost a certain amount of money, your computers cost a certain amount of money, you paid salary for folks at different levels, And those numbers are going to change over time, so you have to have a list of all those assets and modify the value of them as they depreciate or increase over time. All right, so that was step 1. We're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to see term 14.2, identify threats, on the next slide. So the next step of a quantitative risk assessment is to identify threats. And the way ISC squared tells us to do that is using what they call single loss expectancy. So single loss expectancy, SLE, is the monetary loss expected from a single event of a threat exposing a vulnerability. A threat overcame a vulnerability, you detected it, and you identify how much you lost, how much it cost. So the formula for calculating single loss expectancy is the value of the asset times the exposure factor. And the exposure factor is the next term we see down here. It represents the proportion of an asset's value that's likely to be destroyed by a threat exposing a vulnerability. A lot of people, it takes a special type of person to be a risk manager, to want to look at these assets and want to value them and keep track of exposure and all this stuff. So it's usually expressed, exposure factor is usually expressed as a percentage. So for example, if you suspect that only the bottom floor of a 2-story building will be damaged during a flood, then your exposure factor is 50%. And if you expect that all of the asset will be exposed, and you say 100% times the value of the asset. All right, I don't see any comments. Again, we've got some latecomers coming in. If you look at the control panel, scroll down to the bottom, well, near the middle to the bottom, you'll see chat. If you click on the arrow that's pointing to the right and make that arrow go in a downward position, you'll be able to see any comments that people are typing. So if anybody sees anything or wants to say anything, go ahead and put your comment there. We're moving on to slide number 10. Actually, did I skip one here? Yeah. So slide number 9 is perform the threat assessment. To do that, we have to calculate the annualized rate of occurrence, the ARO. The ARO is the probability that a risk will occur in a particular year. All right, so the annual loss expectancy is another calculation that we have. It's another formula that we have to, that requires actual mathematical computation. ALE equals single loss expectancy times the annual rate of occurrence. So we calculated our single loss expectancy. Let me go back here one. SLE equals asset value times exposure factor. Now we're going to take that calculation, that SLE, and multiply it by the annual rate of occurrence. You've got an intrusion detection system. How many times did this suspected incident occur throughout the course of a year? And then the fourth step of a quantitative risk assessment is to handle the risk. And there are 4 ways we can do that. We can reduce the risk, and it's very key to know that this is also referred to as mitigating. Reducing means mitigating, or mitigating means reducing the risk. So you can reduce the risk by implementing security controls and safeguards. All right, things that will help to lessen. You can't completely remove risk. You can usually only mitigate or reduce it. Another option is to transfer the risk. This is usually done with an insurance policy or a service level agreement. So you allow another organization to take the responsibility. But keeping in mind, just because you transfer the risk to a third party, a cloud service provider or something, you are still ultimately responsible or ultimately accountable. You You can delegate responsibility, but you can't delegate accountability. You're ultimately accountable still. The third way to handle the risk is to avoid it. So you can avoid risk by removing system functionality. You could remove the Cd-Rom device altogether, or disable the wireless capability. All right, that's a way to avoid risk. And then it's possible to accept risk. This is something that I preach on a daily basis. If anybody's familiar with the CNA process, instead of creating POAMs, plans of actions and milestones, for every vulnerability you identify, some vulnerabilities you know you can't fix, but you still need the system to operate. So you need to just accept the risk. You're going to keep your eye on it. You're going to keep it in your risk register and identify if the threat increases or the vulnerability changes in any way. Is the likelihood of something happening increasing over time? You're going to keep an eye on it, but you can't accept the risk. You can't ignore it, and that's something you might see on the exam. You cannot ignore the risk, but you can accept it. But by accepting it, you agree to keep an eye on it and keep monitoring it. All right, guys, so we talked about quantitative risk assessment. Now let's talk about a qualitative risk assessment. So the first step of a qualitative risk assessment is, of course, you've identified your assets and done the value and all that stuff, but we need to determine the likelihood of a risk. So this is a subjective decision provided by a subject matter expert. What's the likelihood of a threat overcoming a vulnerability? Anybody's familiar with the NIST 800 series of documents, all based on cybersecurity and information technology. NIST 800-30 is a document that focuses on risk assessments. I believe it's risk management, and it also talks about risk assessments. But they give you definitions for likelihood. The likelihood of a threat overcome a vulnerability is high if the threat source is highly motivated, if controls aren't in place, things like that. It's a good idea to have a definition for why you would select high, why you would select moderate, and why you would select low. You know, it's still a bit subjective and requires a SME to determine what level to select, but at least you have a consistent method for selecting high, medium, or low. You're not just sticking your finger in the air and making a blanket assumption. You can also, with step 2, is have definitions for impact. What's the impact of a risk if a threat overcomes a vulnerability? The impact would be high if human life is threatened, if very expensive assets are at play. The impact is moderate if the value of the assets isn't very strong and it wouldn't cause human death, maybe, you know, minor injury or something like that, and with you've got some controls in place to mitigate the risk. All right, again, it's good to have definitions for high, medium, low. If you have a risk assessment process that includes just those 3 categories of high, medium, or low, I believe the new NIST 800-30, the old one started out with 3 categories of high, medium, or low. The new one now has 5, very high, high, moderate, low, and very low. I always recommend the folks to start out with 3, you know, Occam's razor. Pluralitas non exponenda sine necessitate. Don't build in, you know, don't start with complexity. Start simple and build in complexity over time, only when it's necessary. All right, so if you can see this, let me see if I can do my pointer here, if I can remember how to do this. If I can spotlight this here, if you look at this little risk matrix over here, we've got our probability / likelihood. Make sure you know that those are the same. Don't get those mixed up. Impact and severity are the same. Again, we've had definitions for why we would select low, moderate, or high probability. We've got definitions for why we would select low, moderate, or high impact. So if your probability rating is low and your impact rating is high, then your overall risk rating is low. If your probability rating is high and your impact rating is moderate, then your overall risk rating is moderate or medium. With the thing that I like about the three categories here of high, medium, below is the lower one always wins, right? If you can compare a low to a high, then your overall risk rating is going to be low. And I get a lot of people that ask, you know, well, that doesn't make sense, or how's that happen? But the example I always give is think of Fort Knox, right? If you've got $1 million locked away at Fort Knox, the impact if someone stole your $1 million, of course, would be very high, right? But the likelihood of them stealing it out of Fort Knox is low. So the overall risk rating in that scenario would be low. All right. And then step number 4 of a qualitative risk assessment. And Tyrone, keep me on track here with time. I think we've carved up almost an hour so far, but I think we're getting through. I'm going to probably go pretty quickly through the rest of these risk slides, and then we'll take a little break. We'll come back. We'll jump into crypto. We'll take another break, and then we'll play Jeopardy and Kahoot. So take notes. If you're new, if you're just getting in here, take notes on everything we're talking about, because you're going to be tested in a competitive and fun way towards the end here. All right, step 4 of a qualitative risk assessment is the same as step 4 of a quantitative risk assessment, the way you handle risk. You can handle risk by either reducing it, transferring it, avoiding it, or accepting it. And make sure you remember that you cannot ignore the risk. All right, informational note number 2. Your assessment can be quantitative, and the results can be expressed either quantitatively or qualitatively. We talked about that in a minute. Just because you see numbers expressed, don't assume that the assessment was quantitative. Make sure you pay attention to that question and determine whether the assessment is talking about qualitative elements that require someone's opinion, someone's subjective reasoning, or quantitative elements where they're looking at real numbers over time, money, and the rate of occurrence. All right, so again, my favorite definition in the world. If you don't remember anything about this discussion tonight, make sure you write this down. This is something you can use at your job. Every time you talk about risk, you've got to be talking about these 4 components: likelihood, impact, threat, vulnerability. You don't have a risk unless you have both a threat and a vulnerability. Then once you've identified that you have a risk because you have both a threat and vulnerability, then you need to assess it. And to assess it, you have to look at both the likelihood and the impact of the threat overcoming the vulnerability. If anyone's familiar with FIPS 199 system categorization, that is an impact assessment. It's just an impact assessment. I hear people call it a risk assessment, but it's not, because it's just an impact assessment. In order for it to be a risk assessment, you have to look at likelihood and impact. All right. I think I have hammered that point in. I certainly hope so. The next few slides, I did throw it in the last minute, threw in some cloud stuff. Because I am a CCSK, cloud is near and dear to my heart. So we can jump into that. Tyrone, if you're still listening, do you think is now a good time for a quick break, or can we keep going?
Yeah, actually right now is probably perfect. Normally what we do is we take a break at the 50-minute mark for about 10 minutes and start again at the top of the hour.
Okay. All right, so I have 6:48. Let's go ahead and come back at 7 o'clock. I'm going to go get myself a drink, but I'm going to be here in front of the computer, so if anybody has any questions or comments, write them down in the chat section. Does everybody have access to that chat section, Tyrone? I haven't seen anybody write any comments yet. Anyway, if you just want to say hello, go ahead and write something there. Let's see if it works. All right, guys. See you
Hello,
back in.
everyone. This is Tyrone. From what I understand, I don't believe the chat section is there for everyone, but the question section should be, and the questions only the individual that asked the question and the organizers can see it. So feel free to ask away. We're the only ones who can see your questions. And we'll answer. We won't call you out by name. We'll just answer the question.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Now I'm in the questions section, and I see a bunch of questions here. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and take a break. We'll come back at 7 p.m. I think we'll start out by answering some of these questions. All right, guys. All right. I have 7 p.m. I hope everyone has returned. Tyrone, if you're there, the only real question I saw was when does the virtual course start?
Yeah, I sent a response to that. The virtual course starts this Monday from 6 to 10 p.m. It goes from Monday through Thursday. We'll take a day off that Friday, and we'll go again Monday through Thursday the next week from 6 to 10. And if you're doing the virtual and on-site, then we go Monday through Thursday, take that Friday off, and we have 2 days of on-site in Vienna. And then the very next week, we'll have another 2 days. And it's basically up to Donald how he wants to handle those 2 days. But as you can see, once you get a feel for how it goes, you can see that you'll get a lot out of it.
All right, thank you, sir. So yeah, I've got a schedule that I go through, that I follow in my classes. Some boot camps are a week, some are 2 weeks, depending on the allotted time. How much information do we need to get through per day? So, we have the audio. I give homework to listen to audio episodes. We come back after, or the next day, and I have everyone write down at least 3 to 5 questions or comments on the audio that they listen to, and then we go through the lecture, we watch videos, and then we compete against each other to test our knowledge on that day's material. So in these games and these competitions, they really inspire folks, because you want to do well. When you compete in Jeopardy in a classroom full of people, and we have actual remote control buttons, that you can use to press. It's just like playing Jeopardy on the TV show. But people want to do well. It helps you stay awake. it helps you study the night before, because you want to come in and compete well. So you'll get a little taste of it today. So right now, as you're listening, make sure you're taking notes and paying attention, and we'll have a Jeopardy round. We may not have time to go through the Kahoot, and I haven't tested that yet. So if we have time, we'll try to bring it up and at least give you a taste of it. So, we're allotted 4 hours per night. We're allotted 8 hours on Saturday and 8 hours on Sunday. But if we get through all of the information that we need to get through for that day, then we can spend the rest of the time going over practice questions, or just talking about things that you guys want to talk about. Or of course we can break early on the weekends, but only if we get through everything we need to get through for that day. All right, guys, we are on slide number 14. We're going to jump into some of the content in domain number 3. So my favorite topic is risk management. My second favorite is cryptography. Then my third favorite is the cloud. And this is another topic. It's brand new, something new to the common body of knowledge. Most people don't have much experience with cloud, but there's no getting around it. It's here. It's here to stay. It's going to be taken over in ways you just can't imagine. Every agency that I'm supporting right now, they have an initiative to take all of their systems to the cloud that can be taken, and if it can't be taken to the cloud, then they have to explain why. The cost savings are just that great, and it allows a company who makes widgets, for example, to focus on making widgets and not have to manage computer systems, servers, and a server room and all that stuff. It allows them to focus on what they're good at. But anyway, let's talk about the first couple of terms we have here: virtualization and grid computing. Virtual machines, for me, virtualization is not the cloud, right? You could have a data center that has 10,000 servers in it. 10,000 physical servers, and all 10,000 servers only have one operating system on them. You could have that in the traditional sense, but you could have one of those servers of those 10,000 that's running 5 operating systems on it instead of just one. And that right there is the beauty of virtualization. Studies have shown that if you have, a server has a ton of RAM, a ton of hard drive space, a couple of CPUs, a lot of processing power, and if you just have one operating system on that server with all that capacity, then you're only utilizing 10% of that computer's capabilities. So with virtualization, you could have as many as 5 or more operating systems running on one physical server all at the same time, and then you're truly starting to maximize the capabilities of that physical server, those physical components. So that, for me, virtualization is the engine that drives the cloud. It's the engine that makes it so cost effective that it's just undeniable. Why would you have one physical server with just one operating system when you could be so much more efficient and effective? All right, so virtual machines are they're typically isolated in a sandbox environment, so that if one gets infected, it's not going to infect the others. Grid computing is the sharing of CPU and other resources across a network in such a manner that all machines feature or function as one large computing. It's kind of the predecessor to cloud computing. All right, we go on now to the next slide here, number 16, cloud computing. NIST defines cloud computing as a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources that can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management, effort, or service provider interaction. So this cloud model is composed of 5 essential characteristics. There are 5 characteristics that a typical cloud environment should have. There are 3 service models, and then 4 deployment models. And these, the service models and the deployment models are most important. If you know the service models and the deployment models, then you can talk about cloud intelligently to anyone. And the service models, I think, are the most important thing. But we'll talk about each of these here in a little greater detail. All right, so the 5 characteristics. On-demand self-service. With this, a consumer can unilaterally provision computing capabilities such as server time, network storage, as needed, automatically, without requiring human interaction with each service provider. So they'll provide you a portal with access into their environment. If you've got 10 servers running Linux operating, and you want to add 5 more, then you can just log in and provision more servers and turn on extra service. Broad network access capabilities are available over the network and accessed through standard mechanisms that promote use by heterogeneous thin or thick clients. So you could use mobile phones, tablets, laptops, anything to connect to a cloud environment if they are following the NIST characteristics as defined here. So resource pooling is the next one. The provider's computing resources are pooled to serve multiple customers using a multi-tenant model with different physical and virtual resources dynamically assigned and reassigned according to the consumer demand. I think this one scares people the most, the idea of resource pooling. It doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to have your information commingled with other your competitors' information. I think that idea, though, scares people about the cloud, and we'll talk about how you can get around that. The next characteristic of a cloud environment is rapid elasticity. Capabilities can be elastically provisioned and released, in some cases automatically, to scale rapidly outward and inward commensurate with demand. So to the consumer, the capabilities available for provisioning often appear to be unlimited, and it can be appropriated in any quantity at any time. And then measured service simply says, there's a mechanism by which to measure how much of the services you're using so that you can be charged appropriately. And that's another beauty. You're only charged for what you use. I remember being at the Census Bureau during the 2010 decennial. Every 10 years is when we collect all the census information. And a couple of years before the decennial, they start buying a bunch of servers, bringing a bunch of vendors in, hiring a bunch of contractors, and for about a year we get through the collection of all the information, put it into the systems. Then they start getting rid of contractors, getting rid of vendors, but they're stuck with all those servers. This would be a perfect example of they can provision rapidly the amount of systems they need during the decennial, and then as they don't need them, they can just ratchet down and only pay for what they need. All right, so those are the 5 characteristics. These are the service models, the most important aspect of the cloud, in my opinion. And you'll hear folks talk about, so there are the 3 service models are, I like to start from the bottom: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Those are the only 3 service models. You'll hear a lot of other things as a service, security as a service, all that. NIST only defines 3. All those other as a service things you hear of can be provided from one of these 3, but we have to look at it from the perspective of these 3 service models first. All right, so with infrastructure, I always think infrastructure is the guns, the gates, the guards. So if you purchase infrastructure as a service from a cloud service provider, you don't have to have a data center. You don't have to have a computer room. You don't have to pay for that space. You don't have to pay for the guards to guard it. You don't have to pay for the heating and air conditioning and all that stuff. You outsource that, right? But infrastructure, it goes all the way from the building to the guns, the gates, the guards, to the physical system itself, the physical servers themselves, all the way up to the BIOS of the system or the hypervisor of the system. And I don't think I included that term hypervisor in this deck, but hypervisor is just a small piece of code. When you first turn the power on to a server or a computer system, it goes to the lines of code in the BIOS. And the BIOS tells it where to go find the hard drive, where to find the boot up sequence or the information that it needs to initialize the hard drive. If you have a hypervisor installed, then the BIOS is going to point you to that hypervisor, and then the hypervisor will allow you to spawn multiple operating systems. That's called a bare metal virtualization. You could also not have a hypervisor, but have that BIOS point to the operating system and have a host operating system, and then have software installed on that operating system where you can then spawn multiple virtual operating systems. So infrastructure usually stops at the BIOS or the hypervisor. Platform as a service, the capability provided to the consumer is to deploy onto the cloud infrastructure consumer created or acquired applications created using programming languages. Essentially what that's saying is if you purchase platform as a service from a cloud service provider, you're getting the infrastructure stuff, but then you're getting beyond that that BIOS, you're getting the operating system, right? So if the physical server with infrastructure as a service, if there's a flood in their data center and the physical server gets destroyed, then they're responsible for restoring it, and then you would have to come in and reinstall your operating system and do all that. If you purchase platform as a service from a cloud service provider and there's a flood, then they have to restore the physical server and they have to restore the operating system. Any patching or updates that need to be done on the operating system with platform as a service is the cloud service provider's responsibility. right? It costs a little more money, but less work that you as a cloud consumer have to do. And then the creme de la creme of them all, the one I always recommend, if it's applicable, is software as a service. With software, you're getting the infrastructure, you're getting the platform, the operating system. Another thing that could operate with platform as a service is not just the operating system. It could be a platform or environment for software developers. You know, not the actual programs that are being developed, but the libraries, anything that could be used to help developers develop software, that could be considered part of the platform as well. But with software as a service, the cloud service provider is responsible for the physical server, they're responsible for the operating system, and they're responsible for that any applications that you put on top of those operating systems. The only thing the cloud consumer is responsible for in that case is provisioning users, determining what level of access they should have, and providing that access accordingly. So of course, software as a service is the most expensive. All right, and I'm still looking at the question section here. I do see a question here that says, which book is being used? So I wrote my own course material for the CISSP. I branded it under a different name. Tyrone and I have formed a partnership, and I'm joining Cover6. So we are rebranding all of that material under Cover6. So the material that we're going to be using for the boot camp is material that we developed ourselves. I believe that it's the most efficient and effective grouping of terms, concepts, information that you need to pass the exam. All right. All right, so moving on, slide number 19. So we talked about cloud characteristics. We talked about the cloud service models. Now we're going to talk about the cloud deployment models. So you could deploy cloud services in a private deployment model where only you have access to a specific environment. And this is one I helped FEMA. I helped them move one of the largest system that they use to respond to national disasters into in a cloud environment. And we requested a private deployment model, and the service provider offered us you know, a logical separation between so all of our servers were connected to a set of switches and routers, but then, you know, physically those routers and switches were connected to other things, so logically they cut off that environment for us. And as the cloud broker, I said, you know, wait a minute, we need to have physical separation, not just logical. So that's something you can request as a cloud broker. I don't think very many cloud service providers will tell you that, and they weren't too happy. They charged us a little more money, but we were able to get a physical separation in our private cloud deployment model. Public deployment model is going to be cheaper, but again, all of your resources are shared and commingled with any of their other customers. So not good for organizations or agencies that have sensitive information. And then a community deployment model would be one where, let's say, a couple of companies came together and decided they want to share the expense of creating a cloud environment, and they agreed that their information will be commingled. It could be a department that has several agencies in it, and they stand up, they agree to come together. And then a hybrid is any combination of those three. So again, guys, that is really all you need to know about the cloud to be able to talk about it intelligently and to be able to apply it to everything you know about computers. The cloud characteristics, not every cloud environment is going to have all these characteristics, but that's a good recommendation. Service models is very important, and then deployment models. All right, and then of course you've got, I've been talking about the cloud service provider and the cloud consumer. I hear cloud customer, cloud consumer, but you hear cloud service provider, you know. Now, another thing I didn't mention that if we talk about the service models here, with the risk management framework, when we implement the, if you have a system that's going to go into a cloud environment, one of the things, I was actually at the GSA, General Services Agency, when they first stood up the Fedramp program, which is a program that was developed to assess the cloud environments of companies like AWS, Microsoft Azure, you know, all the big hitters were all a part of this first blanket purchase agreement because they wanted to start offering their cloud services to federal agencies. But before they could do that, they had to go through the risk management framework process, and I managed the team that reviewed their packages and gave the recommendation to the government as to whether these cloud environments were secure enough to provide, to be able to provide their cloud services to federal agencies. So one of the things I pioneered, I probably wouldn't get credit for it, but I pioneered a responsibility matrix, which showed if you've got 1,000 security controls that need to be implemented, which controls are the responsibility of the cloud service provider and which one are the responsibility of cloud consumer. So if you have infrastructure as a service, the cloud service provider is only going to have a little responsibility. The consumer is going to have much more responsibility because the provider is only responsible for the physical infrastructure, the consumer is responsible for the operating system and the applications. But if you purchase platform as a service, then the cloud service providers has more responsibility. They have to be responsible for the infrastructure and the operating system, and then you're just responsible for the applications. But if you move up to software as a service, then the cloud service provider has the lion's share of the responsibility, and you as a consumer has very little responsibility for implementing security controls. So as an information system security officer, I love it when my customer purchases software as a service because that's going to make my job a lot easier. All right, so cloud consumer, cloud service provider. All right, that is all you need to know about the cloud. I have 7:30, so we're going to go for another 20 minutes on crypto. I don't think we'll get through all of crypto, so we may take a break and then come back, get through all of crypto, and then we'll finish up with a round of Jeopardy. All right? All right, here we go. I always tell people I can brainwash you into understanding a lot of the key concepts here with crypto. It requires math. I think that scares people a lot. It's a lot of information, and it is really complex. But we can break it down in a way that makes it a lot more consumable. All right, so for the exam, you're going to have a lot of questions that use these terms. And if you don't understand the distinction between the little tiny little distinctions between these terms, then you're not going to get questions right. But if you do know, then you're going to be able to see the key to answering those questions really easily, really quickly. All right, the first thing with cryptography, words that include the suffix -ography usually refer to an art, a work of art, or in the case of cryptography, a science or field of study. So cryptography is the science of information hiding. The key word there is science. You see that suffix -ography, it's the science of information hiding. And cryptography is the overarching term. Everything we're doing is the study of cryptography. And I see people use cryptology as if when they really should be referring to cryptography, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So again, the key word with cryptography is science. Cryptographer is easy. That's the person who studies cryptography. So the key word with cryptographer is the person. With cryptology, Cryptology is the study of cryptography. So the key word there is study. The key word with cryptography was science. The key word with cryptology is study, the study of cryptography. The suffix ology refers to the study of something. A cryptosystem is a system or device that performs encryption and decryption. I wish I could turn on Tyrone. I think, can I turn on my my video here? I'm going to see if I can get my webcam going real quick. If you guys can see, I want to show you. I have a cipher here. This is a crypto system. This is a device that you can use to encrypt and decrypt information. I hope everybody can see that. All right. Usually it's a mathematical formula, right? But it can be a physical device like this. All right. I think I turned my mug off. Did I turn my mug off? Yeah. Okay. All right. So a crypto system is a system or device that performs encryption and decryption. And keep in mind, it could be a physical device like the one I just showed you. It's typically made up of software, protocols, algorithms, and keys. And we'll talk about those key terms in here in just a minute. Pun intended when I talk about key terms. All right, cryptanalysis is the practice of circumventing crypto systems. So the key word there is practice. All right, make sure you highlight all those keywords there. With cryptography, it's the science. Cryptographer is person. Cryptology is study. And then cryptanalysis is practice. All right, August Kirchhoff, I've heard it pronounced a lot of different ways. August Kirchhoff's principle states that the security of a crypto system should depend solely on the secrecy of the key and the private randomizer. We'll talk about private randomizers a little bit later. The key word there is key, the secret key. So with that, this cipher that I just showed you guys, if I were to line up a phrase, I like money, on this wheel, I would then skip up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I could skip up 26 different times. However many times I skip up, I would then write the list of letters across that row. The key to this crypto system is how many times did I skip up. Okay, so August Kirchhoff is saying that this cipher that I just showed you guys, I could walk around with it in public. Just because you see that doesn't mean you can decrypt my messages. You can't decrypt my messages unless you know what key I'm using. So he's saying that keeping an entire large and complex crypto system secret simply replaces one hard problem with another. So we should only focus on keeping the key secret. And I've actually I've invented my own mechanical crypto system. We're going to see a picture of it here in a minute. I haven't completed it, but I started it, and it really helps illustrate how cryptography works and all the terms you need to know and how to visualize those terms. So I use it more as a teaching aid, but again, I'll show it to you here shortly. All right, so some more key terms with cryptography is plain text. Plain text is readable information. Ciphertext is information in an unreadable form. So the key with cryptography is how are we going to take plain text and convert it into unreadable ciphertext and then convert it back into plain text. A cipher, this is a very key term. Make sure you write this down, make sure you know it. The algorithm used for encryption and decryption is also referred to as a cipher. So algorithm and cipher are the same thing. Algorithm is a step-by-step process you take to change plain text to ciphertext and then back into plain text. So then you could, these next four terms are very similar. Encipher is the act of changing plain text to ciphertext. Decipher is changing ciphertext back to plain text. And encryption and decryption is the same thing. Encryption is conversion of plain text to ciphertext. Decryption is the conversion back from ciphertext to plain text. All right, key space. There are four terms that I want you to know. That very important terms that if you know these four terms, then you'll do well on the exam. And these are two of them. So key is the secret knowledge or value used in an encryption algorithm to encrypt and decrypt information. So I just showed you that. The key is the most important aspect of the entire encryption process, just like August Kirchhoff said. The physical key, that imagine a padlock, right, that has 3 or 4 number dials on it. The key is, the sequence of numbers that you put in there. The actual padlock would be the cipher, the algorithm. Wikipedia suggests that an entire algorithm's key space is the set of all possible keys that can be used to initialize the algorithm. So if we think about that padlock with 4 dials on it, the key space would be how many keys could we select, how many sequences of numbers are available to us to serve as the mechanism that will open the lock. And that's the key space. The key space will be larger if you had 4 dials than if you only had 3. If you only had 3 dials, then the key space would be smaller. The number of possible keys available to you would be smaller. All right, again, these 4 terms. We talked about key and key space. We talked about algorithm. Algorithm, cipher, the same thing. Bit is a term that we hear all the time, but until you have a good example of how to visualize it, then the true meaning can escape you. So that padlock, going back to the padlock, if you've got 3 dials, each dial is a bit. If you've got 4 dials, then you have a 4-bit crypto system. If you have 3 dials, you have a 3-bit crypto system. Essentially, everywhere there's an option to make a selection is considered a bit. Okay, and we'll go into a little more detail about that. I want to show you guys, and I think I may have taken those pictures out of there. Tyrone, could everybody see when I went to webcam? I think if I can find my algorithm, yes. I want to.
Hey,
all right.
We did see you.
Okay. Give me a second here. I need to grab my algorithm, and give me just a second. All right. So I'm really gonna scare you guys with this thing, but it really does help to illustrate the point. All right. So this thing here, this is a cipher or an algorithm, right? If you see the opening there, that's the top part. So the idea is I've got these screws here, and inside this top part I can set a Rubik's Cube on top of that, right? Take a Rubik's Cube, put all 26 letters of the alphabet on an individual cube on here, and I set this down, and it's sitting on all 4 of these screws. So if I unscrew this side, the cube is going to turn that way and drop down. So I should have another layer here, and I want at least 3 layers. So I set it here on the top layer. On this layer, I have to decide which side am I going to unscrew. If I unscrew this side, it's going to flip that way, go down to the next layer. I could then unscrew this side, the cube would flip that way, and then go down to the next layer. Okay? So each layer just like on the padlock, is a bit, right? A decision point where something can happen. So I determine which side, if I say it's side A on the first level, side B on the second level, side C on the third level, then the key is ABC. So the cube drops out, I flip the algorithm upside down, I drop the cube in the way it came out, I reverse the process, and it comes out of the top end with the original letter. So that is an example of an image I want you to have in your mind as I read these notes that I have here for you, okay? But keeping in mind that whole rectangular box is the algorithm / cipher. Each row on that algorithm is considered a bit. The key space, because there are only 3 rows, there are only a certain number of keys that are available to us. If I make it longer and add more rows, then I'm increasing the key space, the number of possible keys we could have. Okay, all 4 of those terms. If you understand those 4 terms, then you'll do well. So let me read this to you, and I hope everyone can follow along with me, having seen that that cipher there. So imagine dropping a Rubik's Cube with every letter of the alphabet attached to individual blocks of the cube into a rectangular wooden box. The wooden box has an opening just wide enough on the top to fit the cube in, and an opening at the bottom that the cube can drop out of. This rectangular box can be referred to as an algorithm. So if our wooden algorithm has a row of screws inserted from the outside to the inside of the center of all 4 faces of the wooden rectangular algorithm, just like I showed, it'll be able to suspend the cube within the wooden rectangular algorithm at different levels. So when you drop the cube into the rectangular algorithm, it rests on the top of the first row of screws. When one screw is reversed outside the algorithm, the cube will flip in that direction and drop to the next level of screws. The cube continues down the shaft of the algorithm until it drops down out of the bottom end of the rectangular algorithm with a different letter or symbol facing. So that's the encryption process. If you flip the rectangular algorithm upside down and drop the cube into the bottom side of the algorithm, the exact same way it came out, and reverse the process, the original letter or symbol will be facing, and that's our decryption process. So the direction of each flip of the cube at each level of the algorithm makes up the algorithm's key. And if you flip the cube the same direction at each level of the algorithm at the same way on 2 different wooden rectangular algorithms, they'll be able to encrypt and decrypt each other's information. So the secret knowledge of this encryption algorithm, the key, is the direction each cube is turned at each level of the algorithm. So if we think of each level of the cube as a bit, and there are 10 levels, I only showed, my example was only for 3, but if we had 10 levels on that wooden rectangular box that the cube has to drop through to get to the bottom, the key space, or the set of all possible combinations of keys, is 2 to the power of 10. And the reason we say we have 10 bits, the reason we say 2 to the power of 10 is because we're dealing with a binary system of 0s and 1s. So if we had 10 bits, 2 to the power of 10 is 1,024 possible keys that we could use to encrypt and decrypt our information. So given this example, we could give the rectangular algorithm box to anyone, right? It's just a cipher, it's just the algorithm. August Kirchhoff said that's not important. The importance is the key. But if they don't know the key to how we drop the cube down the inside of the algorithm, they can't decrypt our messages. So if you increase the number of bits of the key or the number of levels of the algorithm, you are increasing the key space and the number of possible keys or combinations of the algorithm. So algorithms, keys, key space, and bits. If you can understand the relationship between these terms, then you are in great shape. All right, and I hope everyone was able to follow along with that. We spend a lot more time in the boot camps making sure we hammer this stuff into people's minds. All right, so this next slide, number 27, the strength of a crypto system. August Kirchhoff said the key and the randomizer is what's important, but there are a couple of other things. So the strength of a crypto system should be contingent upon algorithm, right? The history has shown that it's difficult to keep an algorithm secret. In fact, August Kirchhoff said the secrecy of the key was most important. But some algorithms, algorithms are just lines of code. Some algorithms are written more efficiently than others and work better than others. The secrecy of the key, of course, is important. Keeping the key secret is absolutely important. The length of the key is important. The longer the key, the more difficult it is for an attacker to try to guess all possible combinations. Think of that padlock. You could try with 000, 001. You can just try all possible combinations and brute force until you find the key. The more possible combinations, the more difficult it's going to be. And then an initialization vector prevents repetition during the encryption process. And we go into more detail in the boot camp, but there are some crypto systems where if you encrypt the word "the," it's going to give you ciphertext or text that's unreadable. And every time you encrypt the word "the," it's going to give you the same ciphertext. And we don't want that repetition. You don't want any repetition in cryptography. So if you add an initialization vector or a randomizer into that encryption process, then you're going to get different ciphertext every time you encrypt the word "the." All right, informational note number 19, not all situations require all of the cryptographic goals. So I don't see my slide here that has the cryptographic goals, but write this down. Just like there are 3 objectives of information security as a whole, right? Everything we do is to satisfy 1, 2, or all 3 of these 3 objectives: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Same thing applies to cryptography, except there are 4 goals of cryptography. Everything we do in cryptography is to satisfy 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these goals. First one is similar to the fundamental objectives of information security. The first fundamental objective of cryptography is confidentiality. Second one is integrity, so very similar. We're still using those 2 are the same. But the third one is availability. Well, with information security, it's availability. With cryptography, it's not availability. You can't provide availability with cryptography. It's authentication. So confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and then non-repudiation. Those are the 4 objectives of cryptography. Okay. So authentication, usually with a digital certificate or a private key that only you have, you can authentically claim that you are who you claim to be. And then with non-repudiation, that's saying that you can't deny that you sent a message, and a receiver can't deny that they received the message. And we'll talk about exactly how you can achieve all 4 objectives of cryptography in great detail. And once we get to that point, I think that's the last part we're going to talk about with crypto tonight. But I've got several scenarios that show you how to achieve all 4 of those objectives. And once you get those scenarios down in your head, you are ready for any question that they throw at you about cryptography. All right, I have got 7:45. My clock on my computer is a little fast, so we can keep going. We got 5 more minutes, and we're going to take a break. All right, so given those 4 objectives of cryptography, not all situations require all of the cryptographic goals, and not all cryptographic systems or crypto systems will be developed to achieve all of them. Some crypto systems are just developed to provide confidentiality, Some are just developed to provide integrity. Some are developed to provide integrity, non-repudiation, and authentication. Depends. All right. All ciphers. What's another word for cipher? We said algorithm and cipher are the same thing. So all ciphers involve either transposition or substitution. And FT-POTE, transposition causes diffusion and substitution causes confusion. But really what we're saying with these two terms is that, and I don't have the graphic that I usually use to show this, but think of a soccer field, right? If anyone knows anything about soccer, you're going to have 11 guys on the field positioned in certain areas on the field. So you have the goalie in the back. In front of the keeper, you'll have 4 guys that are beside each other in front of him. Then you may have 3 guys in front of him, 3 guys in front of him, and then 2 guys, and that's their shape. If you just rearrange those players into different positions on the field, maybe you'll have just 3 guys in the back, 4 guys at the next level. That is transposition. So if you take the word the and just transpose it to, instead of THE to HTE, then you have transposed those letters. You've encrypted them, you've changed them so that they can't be, you can't read a word, but you've just moved them around. With substitution, imagine the soccer field where you take a player off and you bring a new player on. So if we were to use, if our crypto system used substitution for the word the ciphertext wouldn't include the letters THE. It would replace those letters with different letters altogether. Okay, so all crypto systems use either transposition or substitution. Some of them use both. All right, one-time pad is the only cipher, the only cryptographic algorithm to date that remains theoretically unbreakable. Every other crypto system has proven to be broken. Maybe the key size was smaller, but it's been proven to be broken. One-time pad is the only one that's theoretically unbreakable, but there are certain conditions that have to be in place in order for it to be unbreakable. So with a one-time pad, a plain text character is combined and encrypted with a character from a secret key. So if a message has 50 characters, if you write a message that has 50 characters in it, then your one-time pad or the secret key must also have 50 characters or more. So you imagine taking a piece of paper and just randomly writing 50 characters on a sheet of paper. So in order to remain unbreakable, the key must be random. That's the way you selected those 50 characters must have been random. It must be kept secret. So that's 2 points. It must be random, it must be kept secret, and it must be as large as or larger than the plain text message. That's point number 3. And the one-time pad must never be reused. So those 4 things must be in place in order for a one-time pad to be unbreakable. Another key point is that a one-time pad is also referred to as a Vernam cipher, and on the exam you might just see Vernam cipher. You might not see one-time pad at all, but make sure you know that a Vernam cipher is one-time pad. This exclusive OR function, XOR function, is we're going to see some slides here in just a minute that show us in more detail. But this is the nitty-gritty. This is how the rubber meets the road. If you have a message that starts with the word the, you know, what combinations of zeros and ones make the letter T? What combinations of zeros and ones make the letter H? What combination of zeros and ones make up the letter E? You're going to take those zeros and ones and compare each bit of your message to the bit of an encryption key. And the way you compare those bits to each other is through this XOR function. And we'll see how that's done here. All right, so let me get my little pointer here. So if we look at A is our message in binary form. Let's imagine that's the word "the" in binary form, or maybe it's just the letter T, depending on the number of bits in the system. And then our encryption key is here, B. If we compare the letter, and I got my thing here in the way. I hope you guys can't see my control panel covering up the screen that I'm showing you. But essentially the XOR function, if you compare a 0 to a 1, then you get a 1. If you compare a 1 to a 1, you get a 0. So essentially what that's saying is if the 0 and 1, if the two binary digits are different, then you get a 1. If the two binary digits are the same, you get a 0. So 1 and 1 give you 0, 1 and 1 give you 0, 0 and 0 give you 0 because they're the same. But if they're different, you get a 1. So that is essentially how most crypto systems encrypt information, using bit by bit, comparing your plain text to the encryption key and coming up with ciphertext. And then you just reverse that process to get back to the plain text to decipher. All right. So informational note number 21. How are we doing on time here? Oh, I'm going over just a little bit. All right. Let's go ahead and stop here. Let's take a break. We'll come back at 8 o'clock. We'll knock out the rest of these crypto slides, and then we'll play a round of Jeopardy. All right, guys. See you in about 8 minutes. All right, guys, we are reaching the home stretch here. Got another minute, but wanted to jump on a little early and answer a question I see here. It says, so would MD5 be considered a crypto system? MD5 is a hashing algorithm. It's used to, we'll talk about hashing here in a minute, but hashing is different from encryption. Encryption and decryption is a two-way process. You encrypt the message and then you decrypt it. Hashing is a one-way function. You don't hash and then dehash or unhash. The purpose of hashing is just to make the information a bit random and to protect the integrity of the message. And that's the key thing you need to know about hashing for the exam. Whenever you see hashing, think of integrity. And you need to be able to recognize these algorithms. MD5 has a hashing algorithm rather than a crypto algorithm. All right, I've got 8 o'clock on the nose, and I want to get through all this stuff so we can play around with Jeopardy. So let's go ahead and dive in. So informational note number 21. Some countries have laws that prohibit individuals from taking any part of a crypto system outside of the country. We have that law here. You can't take, if you have a government laptop that has cryptography on it, you can't take it out of the country. But some countries require a license to even use cryptography. And in the boot camps, I like to bring up some controversial topics to spur conversation, get everybody's juices boiling and running, and spur debate. But one of the things I believe cryptography is one of the most dangerous weapons, devices on the planet, as much as nuclear weapons. Cryptography is such a dangerous and powerful tool that it shouldn't be in the hands of the general public, in my opinion. We've got terrorists and things, right? We've got these folks communicating with each other using cryptography, and we can't determine what they're saying. It takes us too long to crack to find the key to crack their messages that they've performed what they want to do before we've cracked the system. So in my opinion, you have to have a license to use crypto. No one else can use crypto. You see someone send an encrypted message on a computer, go pick them up and find out why. But yeah, let's save that topic for the boot camp. All right, a very important point with cryptography. We've talked about a lot of important stuff. The 4 objectives of cryptography, those key terms: cryptography, cryptology, cryptosystem. All cryptography is performed using either transposition or substitution. The XOR function is at where the rubber hits the road in terms of encrypting binary digits. This is very important. You have symmetric cryptography and asymmetric cryptography. Symmetric key crypto systems operate much faster than asymmetric crypto systems. But asymmetric crypto systems are more secure than symmetric crypto systems. And symmetric crypto systems, if you have a pen and pad, go ahead and write this down. Symmetric cryptography uses one shared secret key. It's one key that you use to encrypt the message and that same key to decrypt the message. And you have to share that key with whoever you're going to encrypt information with. But the key there is to know that it's a secret key, shared secret key. The S in secret is the same as the S in symmetric. So if you see a question that talks about a secret key, then that's a hint that they're talking about symmetric cryptography. The problem with symmetric cryptography is how to share that secret key with the individual you want to encrypt and decrypt messages with. That's one problem. How are you going to share it with them the first time? Once you share it with them the first time, then you can you can both be wherever you want to be and encrypt and decrypt messages with each other from then on. Another problem is if there are 3 folks that I want to encrypt messages with symmetric cryptography, I have to have one shared secret key with person 1, I have to have a different shared secret key with person number 2, and a different shared secret key with person number 3. So the number of keys that you'll have to have is becomes a little overwhelming depending on the number of folks you want to encrypt and decrypt messages with. But the advantage with symmetric cryptography is it's faster. If you have a very long message, you can encrypt it easily better with symmetric cryptography. With asymmetric cryptography, you have 2 keys. You have a public key and a private key. So that private key is you know, the public key can go out in the public repository. Anyone with access to the system can see that public key, and it's supposed to be that way. That private key, though, only you have it. Just like the secret key in symmetric cryptography, the private key in asymmetric cryptography, only you have. You keep that to yourself. So with asymmetric cryptography, there's usually a third party like the DMV. You know, if you're going to go there and get a driver's license, you have to give them, you know, 3 or 4 forms of identification. They have to prove that you are who you are. Give them a pint of blood, your firstborn child, it seems, in some cases. But they prove that you are who you are, and then they give you this driver's license, and then everyone else can trust that that driver's license is authentic because they know it's only issued by a trusted third party. So with asymmetric cryptography, you go and you get a public and private key from a trusted third party, and then everyone who has a public and private key from that same trusted third party can trust each other. So that eliminates the problem with symmetric cryptography with respect to sharing that secret key the first time. You don't have to worry about sharing keys with asymmetric cryptography. You go to the certificate authority or the PKI administrator, and they issue you a public and private key. So that's an advantage of asymmetric cryptography. It's you don't have the problem with sharing the key the first time. You don't have that. The problem with asymmetric cryptography is that it's slower. You know, the algorithms have more code and they have to do more, so they're not as small and efficient as symmetric cryptography. And for that reason, most crypto systems today use both symmetric and asymmetric. And we go into great detail in the boot camp about how crypto systems use both symmetric and asymmetric. But those are the key points I want you to know. You have a public and a private key with asymmetric and one shared secret key with symmetric. With symmetric cryptography, you can only achieve one of the 4 goals of cryptography. Confidentiality. That's the only thing you can achieve with symmetric cryptography. With asymmetric cryptography, you can achieve all 4 goals of cryptography. And again, when we finish up, we're going to talk about how you do that. All right, symmetric crypto systems. With symmetric crypto system, the sender and receiver of a message share one secret encryption key. That same key is used to encrypt and decrypt. On the exam, you will see this formula. How do you calculate the number of keys that you would need to have, and they'll give you a number, say 20 or 30. So you put the number 20 in as n, so you perform this mathematical computation. 20 minus 1 is 19, 19 times 20 is whatever, and then all of that divided by 2 would equal the number of keys you would need for the number of people you want to communicate with symmetric cryptography. And the formula to determine how many keys you would need for asymmetric cryptography is just 2 times the number of people, the public and private key. All right, this is going into a little more detail than I think I want to go right now. I'll save this for the boot camp. Stream ciphers and block ciphers. I'll just say that symmetric cryptography uses stream and cipher. That little symbol there with the circle and the plus sign in the middle is an XOR. Represents an XOR function where you're comparing the first bit of the key to the first bit of the plain text message and getting the ciphertext. 1 bit at a time is stream cipher, or multiple bits at a time is a block cipher. One-way function, we said a hashing algorithm is a one-way function. The intent that with hashing, think of integrity. Imagine taking, with hashing, imagine taking a bean counter and pouring a bunch of beans into this bean counter. It's going to spit out every bean. It's going to look at its orientation and memorize that. And once it gets all the beans out, it's going to give you a certain number, a digest or a hash value. Every time you run your message through a hashing function, it's going to give you a hash value, a number. You run that message through it again, it's going to give you that same number. It's a one-way function. That's all you intend for it to do, is to give you that hash value. If you change one letter, one bit in your message, and then run it through that hashing function, you're going to get a different value. And that's how you type your message, you run it through a hashing algorithm, you send it to someone else, and then they run the message through the hashing function, and you both should have the same hash value. If someone intercepts your message in transit and changes it, and then the receiver receives it and runs it through the hashing value, the hash values will be different. All that happens in the background, the system will let you know that something was changed. Can't tell you exactly what was changed, but it can tell you that the integrity of the message was compromised. A nonce is a number generated for a specific purpose and used only once. Salts are similar to a nonce, and a nonce provides that randomization that we want to have in our crypto process. So salts do the same thing as a nonce. Salts are random bits which serve as input to a one-way function. So nonces are used for cryptography and the encryption and decryption process, and salts are used for hashing. All right, some symmetric ciphers. That's one of the things. There's a muscle memory chart for all of these symmetric and asymmetric ciphers. You need to be able to recognize that DES and triple DES are symmetric ciphers. We go into much more detail in the boot camp. Know that AES and Blowfish are symmetric ciphers. Informational note number 24, the limitations of a symmetric key crypto system. We already talked about this. The secure distribution of the key with symmetric cryptography at the first initial exchange of the key is difficult. And it can only provide confidentiality, only one of the 4 objectives of cryptography. With asymmetric cryptography, or asymmetric cryptography is also referred to as public key cryptography. Uses 2 different keys, a public and a private key, that are mathematically connected to each other. And we'll go into detail in the boot camp about how they're mathematically connected. All right, 2 more slides, and then we're going to play a round of Jeopardy based on all the information that we've gone through so far. All right, so we talked about this already, the 4 goals of cryptography: confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and non-repudiation. So now let's go through these scenarios, and we'll talk about how you achieve all 4 objectives of cryptography using asymmetric cryptography. All right, so the first scenario, if I'm the sender and Tyrone is the receiver, if I want to send Tyrone a message and protect the confidentiality of that message, I'm going to type my message. I'm going to go out to the repository and get his public key, because the public key is available in that repository to anyone who has access to it. I'm going to encrypt my message with his public key and then send it to him, because only he can decrypt it with his corresponding private key. And that's another point that I didn't mention with asymmetric cryptography. You could encrypt the message with your public key and then only decrypt it with your private key. You could encrypt the message with your private key and then only decrypt it with the corresponding public key. All right, so you can encrypt and decrypt with either key. But scenario 1, the sender encrypts a message with the receiver's public key that gives you confidentiality. It also, and I need to change this slide, it also gives you non-repudiation, but only so if I write my message, encrypt it with Tyrone's public key, and send it to Tyrone, only Tyrone has the corresponding private key to decrypt that message. Only he could decrypt it. So there's non-repudiation. He cannot repute that he received that message, because only he could have decrypted it with that private key. So actually with this one, you get confidentiality and non-repudiation, but only non-repudiation on the receiver side. You don't get integrity. You don't get authentication. You don't get integrity because we didn't use a hashing function. You don't get authentication because we didn't encrypt with a private key. Scenario 2, me as a sender, I write my message. I encrypt my message with my private key, and then I send it to Tyrone. Now, I send it over to Tyrone. He can go to the public repository, get my public key, and decrypt the message. But guess what? Anyone else could go into that repository and get that public key and decrypt that message. So with scenario 2, I don't intend to have confidentiality. All right. The fact that I encrypted the message with my private key and only I could have done that gives authentication. I am authentically who I claim to be, and non-repudiation on the sender's part because only I could have encrypted that message with my private key. I don't get confidentiality because anybody can get the public key to decrypt. I don't get integrity because we didn't use a hashing function. Scenario 3, the sender performs a hash function on a message and sends it over. So again, hashing equals integrity. The integrity of the message is protected. You don't get confidentiality. You don't get authentication. You don't get non-repudiation. Scenario 4, the sender performs a hashing function on the message and then encrypts the message with the receiver's public key. So this is similar to scenario 1, except we're adding the hashing function. So with that, we get confidentiality because we use the receiver's public key. We get integrity because we did a hashing function. We also get non-repudiation on the receiver's part because only he can decrypt with his corresponding private key. So I need to adjust this slide again. The only thing we don't get is authentication. Scenario 5, digitally sign a message to a digital signature. To generate a digital signature, you have to write your message, hash that message, and then encrypt with your private key. That is how to generate a digital signature. Hash and encrypt with a private key. So again, if you generate a digital signature, you used hashing, so you're getting integrity. You used your private key, so you're getting authentication and non-repudiation, but you're not getting confidentiality. All right, and then scenario 6, the sender attaches a digital certificate to a message. A digital certificate is different from a digital signature. Digital signature is just like a regular signature, only you, it's easy for you to write, but it's difficult for someone else to duplicate. In the case of cryptography, only you could have digitally signed it. A digital certificate, really it only ties your public key to your identity. And it solves one of the problems with asymmetric cryptography. If you go to the public repository and there are multiple people with the name Donald Parker, you don't know which one you want to send a message to. You could double click on their digital certificate and see more descriptive information about them, their room number, the telephone number, but you can see the public key that's associated with that user identity and who signed it, which third-party authority, what root certificate was used to sign that, that certificate. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and stop here with the slide deck. I'm going to bring up the Jeopardy board, and the way we're going to play this is you're going to use the question section. So I'll choose someone to go first. They'll make the first selection of the category and the dollar amount, and then as soon as I click on it, anyone can type the correct response into the question section. The first person to type in the response will get the points and then get to make the next selection. So you'll have to type in the category and the dollar amount in the question section. We've only got about it's 20. We've only got about 10-15 minutes, so let's go through this pretty quickly. We may not get through all of it, but let's go ahead and get through some of it, just to give you a taste of what it's like in the boot camp. All right, so we've got Cover6 Jeopardy. For this round of Jeopardy, we've got 6 categories. First category is key terms in cryptography, the history of cryptography, some random terms within cryptography, the key, questions specific to the key, symmetric cryptography, and asymmetric cryptography. So all crypto. All right, let me look and see who my attendees are. Barry Parker, because you have a phenomenal last name, can you, if you're still with us, can you type in the question section, which category do you want and for how much? And if I don't see his response in there quickly, then I'm just going to make it and select it for you guys. All right, he's with us. 200 for history. All right, as soon as I click on this, you guys be ready to type in your response. All right, here we go. Oh, I didn't get through these slides. Oh, darn it. Okay, so we're going to test you guys. This is a little bit harder. I'll give you some hints because we didn't talk about some of this. The Spartans wrapped papyrus around this to encrypt a message. It's a long pole, and you would wrap a message around this pole. The thickness of the pole was what's important. So you'd wrap your message, as long as you had 2 poles of the same thickness, that's your algorithm. You have 1 pole, you give the pole to someone else, you wrap the paper around the pole, write your message across it vertically, and then you unwrap the message, the paper from the scroll, and then it can't be read. You take that message to 100 miles down the road, give it to the other person, they wrap it around their pole of the same width, and they can see it. Now, the first correct response I got was from Lem Griffin. What is Skytail? Go ahead and keep your own score. That's 200 points for Lem. Lem, go ahead and make the next selection. All right, category is key, and for 400, here we go. The set of all possible keys that can be used to initialize an algorithm. We talked about this. The set of all keys. The first correct response is from B. Wise. What is key space? All right, that was for 400. Be wise. Make your selection, please. We're going to do key for 600. The instance when 2 different keys generate the same ciphertext from the same plain text. We didn't talk about this, but if you guys have been studying, and I see that some of you are, Be Wise and Lem, you guys have the same thing. It's close. That's close. That's not quite it. It does start with a C, but it's not collusion. Collusion is a term where you want separation of duties. You have a task that needs to be performed in your office, and you break it up into 2 parts. One person knows one, the other person knows another, so they would have to collude with each other in order to perform fraud. And I don't see the correct response yet. So we may come back. Who got that last one? Be Wise. All right, so the correct response here is key clustering. I apologize, guys. We didn't get through all of the slides to talk about all this stuff. So, Be Wise, go ahead and make another selection. Symmetric for 200. Here we go. This cipher operates on a group of bits at a time. I briefly touched on this. Correct response from Be Wise. What is a block cipher? All right, Be Wise, you might be a Terminator up in here. People that do well, I call them Terminator. All right, Be Wise, symmetric for 400. This is used to encrypt and decrypt messages using a symmetric cipher. What is that key called? Symmetric cryptography uses a key that's called what? First correct response is from Lem, the Terminator. What is the secret key? Shared secret key. The S in secret, the same as the S in symmetric. All right, Lem, what is your selection? You with us, Lem? All right, key for 600. Actually, we've already done that one. The ones that are in blue, we've done already. The ones in yellow are available to us. So I'm gonna go ahead and give you key for 800, since that one's available to us. An estimate of how much time and how many resources are required to crack a crypto system. We didn't talk about this, so if you get this one, then you've been studying, and you might be ready. We kind of touched on it. The key space. If the key space is small, then the amount of work it's going to take to crack the system isn't going to be very much. But if the key space is large, it's going to take more time to crack the system. All right, note takers on this one. The correct term is work factor. Work factor. The key space, the size of the key space determines the work factor, how much work it's going to take. All right, Lem, go ahead and make another selection. All right, we'll do the same category for big money. An arbitrary number used along with a secret key for data encryption. We talked a little bit about this. I gave you two terms. We don't want to encrypt the word the and get ciphertext, and then every time we encrypt the word the, we get the same ciphertext. We want it to be random. I have a correct response. It's not what I have in my answer board, but it is correct. So I'm going to go with it. Jenny Jose has the correct response. She said a knots, but initialization vector provides the same function. So Jenny, the board is yours. We'll go symmetric for 600. This is the primary weakness of a symmetric cryptography. We talked about several weaknesses with symmetric cryptography. If you give me one. Tony Vo, you are correct. It's not what I have on here. I have key exchange. Actually, you said key transfer. That's the same thing. Key exchange, key transfer is one of the weaknesses of symmetric cryptography. All right, Tony, what do you got? Random terms for big money. It's going to jump out of the box on a new category. All right, a mathematical function that is significantly easier to compute in one direction than in the opposite direction. Yeah, we talked a little bit about this. It's a one-way function. I have a correct response. Be wise. You said hashing. It's not exactly what I had. Tony Bo got it. He was right behind you and used the exact same term, the exact terminology. But I'm going to give it to Be wise because you are correct. One-way function. Hashing is a one-way function. All right, Be wise. Random for 8. The only cipher to date that remains theoretically unbreakable. We talked about this. Correct response from Be wise with the quick fingers, quick fingers on the trigger. What is a one-time pad? The one-time pad, the pad, it must be random, must be as long or longer than the message, must be kept secret, and can only be used once. All right, Be wise. Let's go random for 6. With this cipher, letters or symbols are substituted or changed from what they were originally into different letter or symbol. We touched on this one too. Yep, first correct response is from Lem. He abbreviated it, but he is correct. What is a substitution cipher? Substitution versus transposition. All right, Lem, what do you got? All right, I don't see it. Maybe it's taking a while to come through the system, so I'm going to make the selection for you, Lem. We're going to stay with random for 400. Here we go. This cipher rearranges plain text instead of changing it into something different. We talked about that also. First correct response from B-Wise, the Terminator. Transposition. All right, B-Wise. Tony, you were right behind him. Everybody jumped on this one. Stephanie and Abby, you guys were right behind him. All right, key terms for 1,000. The practice of circumventing crypto systems. The practice. First correct response from B-Wise, Crypt Analysis. All right, B-Wise, we got. We're at time, so we can go ahead and finish this thing out. B-Wise, what do you got? 800 for key terms for 8. Here we go. A system or device that performs encryption and decryption. Layups. These are layups. System or device. First correct response is from Tony. What is a crypto system? All right, Tony, what do you got? B-Wise, you're right behind them. You too, Lem. All right, asymmetric for 1,000. This is a weakness of an asymmetric crypto system. We briefly touched on it. CPU time, I'll give that to you, B-Wise. What is efficiency? Asymmetric crypto systems are not as efficient as symmetric crypto systems. A lot more coding that require more CPU time. Key terms for 200. The science of information hiding. What suffix equals science? Correct response from Tony. B-Wise, you were close. Tony got it correct. What is cryptography? The overarching term here, cryptography. All right, Tony. We're getting through this round really quickly. Asymmetric for 400. This is how public and private keys are connected to each other. We briefly touched on that. You get a public and private key. They are connected to each other via something that I majored in college. Correct response is from Tony. What is math? They use two large numbers. What are they called? Prime numbers. If you try to multiply two large prime numbers, crypto can anyway, we'll go into more detail in the boot camp about how that math works. All right, that was Tony. What do you got? Yeah, I think there's a delay on your system, Tony, because it comes in a little bit late. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, here we go. Asymmetric for 600. This cryptographer discovered asymmetric cryptography. We didn't talk about him. So if you are studying and you get this one, you can give yourself double the points on this one. We're going through a lot of detail about these algorithms and the developers of them. Yeah, oh wow, we got a correct response from Tony. What is Diffie-Hellman? Diffie-Hellman. Great job. All right, Tony, what do you got? Asymmetric for 8. This is a strength of an asymmetric crypto system. Bit length, not necessarily. You could have an algorithm that uses bits of different lengths, different bit lengths. I'm going to go with LEM with more security. That is a strength of Cryptosystem. Key distribution is also easy. You don't have to worry about distributing the key for the first time. But asymmetric cryptosystems are more secure. Key size, not necessarily be wise. But okay, let's go, Lem. What do you got? All right, there might be a delay and we're over time, so I'm going to make the selection. I'm going to close out asymmetric for 200. This is also referred to as public key cryptography. First correct response is from Tony, asymmetric cryptography. All right, Tony, your selection. All right, history for 600. The Germans used this shift cipher machine. There's a movie about it, The Imitation Games. First correct response is from Tony, the Enigma. I have videos that show how the Enigma worked that I show in the boot camps. All right, Tony. History for 800. The Egyptians used these to encrypt messages. Very popular. We've seen these all over the place. These little symbols that the Egyptians used. That is a form of cryptography. I don't see a response. There we go. First correct response from Lem. What are hieroglyphics? That is a form of cryptography. Heck, language can be a form of cryptography. If you don't speak Spanish and someone's speaking Spanish, it may as well be encryption, right? All right, Lem, what do you got? History for 4. The Romans used this simple shift cipher. Correct response from B-Wise, Caesar. Caesar cipher, that simple shift cipher that we go into greater detail in the boot camps. History for big money, close out that category. The Japanese use this encryption, use this to encrypt messages. It's a particular color. We called it that for, I forget the reason why they called it. The correct response from B-Wise, the purple cipher. All right, B-Wise. Key terms for 6. We're getting there. The study of cryptography. Keyword study. Correct response is from Tony. What is cryptology? The suffix ology means study. All right, Tony. Yep, it always takes a minute here. All right, I don't see yours. So here we go. Key for 400 to close out that category. The person who studies cryptography. This is a layup. Correct response from Tony. What is a cryptographer? All right, 4 more to go. And I'll let you guys have your night back. Random for 200. Close out that category. This principle suggests that the secrecy of a crypto system should depend solely on the secrecy of the crypto key, not the crypto system. Kirchhoff's principle is the correct response from Tony. All right, Tony, what do you got? Key for 200, close that one out. The secret knowledge or value used in an encryption algorithm. This is a layup, don't overthink it. Correct response from Tony is the key. All right, last 2. Let's go ahead and go with 800. This is the only goal of cryptography that symmetric ciphers provide. Of those 4 goals, correct response from Tony, symmetric cryptography only provides confidentiality And the last one is, this is an advantage of symmetric cryptography over asymmetric cryptography. We kind of talked about this one already. Speed, be wise, there you go. Efficiency, speed. All right, guys. I greatly appreciate your time. I'll turn it over to Tyrone if you're still with us.
Yes, I'm still here. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out. Thank you, Donald, for the great presentation and the material that was put out tonight. It was really, really great, you know, as expected. I did put a link in there to a recent post that we just created that has these slides on it. Once the video is done here, I'll also post a link to register to view this video on the same blog post. And I look forward to the upcoming boot camp. And also, we also plan to have, you know, more CISSP reviews and CISSP Jeopardies in the near future, you know, as an alternative to meetup groups and boot camps. So thank you all for the support, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tyrone. Take care.
Have a great night.